The flicker of the street lamp cut through the thick fog of Harlem's darkened streets. It was late. Too late for any business that wasn't dirty, but the stillness wasn't what had Bumpy Johnson on edge. It was the subtle tension in the air, the feeling that something was shifting in the underworld, something dangerous that threatened to undo everything he had fought for. Bumpy stood by the door of the rundown speakeasy, his silhouette barely visible in the shadows. He was a man used to the grind of the streets, the ceaseless games of power and loyalty. But tonight, something felt different. The whispers had grown louder, the pressure from rival gangs more intense. Harlem wasn't just a battleground for control, it was a war zone, and the stakes had never been higher. The lights inside flickered once more before going out completely. For a moment, the city's familiar noises seemed to cease altogether. Bumpy's grip tightened on the gun at his side. His instincts told him something bad was coming, the kind of bad that only comes when a man makes a deal with the devil. A voice called out from behind him, breaking the silence like a gunshot. "You sure about this, Bumpy?" It was Big Jim, his loyal enforcer and confidant, stepping up with his usual no-nonsense demeanor. Bumpy didn't turn around. He didn't need to. "If you think I have a choice, Jim," Bumpy said, his voice steady, "you're wrong. This is the price of power in Harlem. Every king has to make a deal with the devil at some point." Big Jim was silent for a moment, then he nodded. He knew better than to question Bumpy when he had his mind set on something. "You think Dutch Schultz will keep his word?" he asked, the skepticism in his voice almost unnoticeable. "Dutch Schultz doesn't have the guts to back out of a deal like this," Bumpy replied, his voice cold. "But if he tries, it'll be the last thing he ever does." As Bumpy and Big Jim walked into the speakeasy, they were greeted by a grim-faced group of men. The dim light revealed a few familiar faces, but there were others, new players in the game, hungry and dangerous. The room smelled of whiskey and sweat, a familiar mix, but tonight it felt different. There was something in the air, a sense of inevitability that neither man could ignore. Bumpy Johnson's name was spoken with respect and fear across Harlem. Born in 1905 in Charleston, South Carolina, he had come to New York as a young man and quickly established himself as one of the most powerful figures in Harlem's criminal world. By 1937, Bumpy controlled everything from gambling to the heroin trade, and his reach extended far beyond the city's borders. His reputation was built on his ability to outthink and outfight anyone who dared challenge him. In Harlem, Bumpy's power wasn't just about muscle, it was about respect. He had earned that respect through years of hard work, loyalty, and ruthlessness. Bumpy wasn't a man who sought out trouble, but when it came to protecting what was his, he didn't hesitate. He had been through the worst the streets had to offer and had come out on top each time. But Harlem wasn't just a place. It was a living, breathing thing. And Bumpy had always known that the moment he let his guard down, someone would come for his throne. It wasn't just the gangsters that Bumpy had to worry about. Harlem was a politically charged environment, with corruption running through every level of power. The police were in bed with criminals, the politicians were bought and paid for, and no one could be trusted. But Bumpy had managed to carve out his territory by understanding the delicate balance of power in the city. He didn't just work with criminals, he worked with the system itself, bending it to his will. By 1937, the Mafia had set its sights on Harlem, and Bumpy knew it was only a matter of time before someone tried to take it from him. The men in the Mafia were ambitious, ruthless, and more connected than ever. But Bumpy wasn't just going to hand over Harlem. He had spent too many years building his empire to lose it to men who thought they could buy their way in. It wasn't long before Bumpy's suspicions were confirmed. Dutch Schultz, a notorious gangster who had made his fortune through bootlegging and other illegal activities, was making moves in Harlem. He wasn't the only one, but Schultz's actions were different. He had been trying to establish a foothold in the city for years, but he was moving faster now, cutting into Bumpy's territory with no regard for the delicate balance that had been established. Schultz wasn't just trying to take over the drug trade, he was trying to take over Harlem. He was trying to buy up politicians, bribe police officers, and recruit soldiers to do his bidding. Bumpy knew that if Schultz succeeded, it would mean the end of his empire. He wasn't the kind of man to let that happen. Bumpy's first warning came in the form of a meeting with one of Schultz's lieutenants, a man named Mickey. Mickey had been seen talking to some of Bumpy's men, trying to stir up trouble. When Bumpy confronted him, Mickey was all smiles. But Bumpy could see the tension in his eyes. He knew Mickey had orders from Schultz to try to undermine him. "You're barking up the wrong tree, Mickey," Bumpy said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "You're trying to play in my territory, and that's a mistake you won't live to regret." Mickey shifted uneasily, glancing around the room as if trying to find an escape route. "It's not personal, Bumpy," Mickey stammered. "This is just business. Schultz is looking to expand his operations and we, Bumpy cut him off with a sharp glare. "You think you're in a position to make deals with me? Let me make this clear. There's only one king in Harlem and his name is Bumpy Johnson. Schultz may have money, but he doesn't have the streets. Not like I do." Mickey took a step back, eyes wide with fear. I didn't mean any disrespect, Bumpy. Just tell me what you want." Bumpy's lips curled into a cold smile. "Tell Schultz that if he wants Harlem, he'll have to take it from me. And tell him to bring more than money. He's going to need an army." As Mickey rushed out of the room, Bumpy felt the weight of what was coming. Schultz had just made the mistake of trying to make deals in Bumpy's city. The stage was set for the war that was about to erupt across the streets of Harlem. The streets of Harlem were alive with rumors, each corner buzzing with speculation about the upcoming clash between Bumpy Johnson and Dutch Schultz. Bumpy had given his warning, but now the question was whether Schultz would back down or escalate the fight. Time, as always, would tell. Bumpy wasn't a man to wait for trouble to come to him. He had spent his life navigating the delicate dance of power in Harlem, and he knew that once a line was crossed, there was no turning back. He had to be proactive. A king didn't wait for challengers to rise up. He snuffed them out before they could get a foothold. It was in the dead of night, just after the streets had quieted, that the confrontation finally came. Bumpy's men had been following the movements of Schultz's crew for weeks. Word had come through that Schultz himself was in town, trying to meet with one of Bumpy's old allies, a man who had been on the fence about who to support in the war for Harlem's streets. That man was a key player, and Bumpy knew that if he let Schultz sway him, it would be the first domino in a long line of problems. Bumpy wasn't about to let that happen. He and Big Jim slipped into the shadows outside a quiet brownstone where Schultz's men had gathered. There was a hush in the air, the kind that only came when the city knew something big was about to go down. Bumpy could feel the tension vibrating in his chest. It was that silent moment before the storm, the one that everyone in Harlem had been waiting for. "You ready?" Big Jim asked, his voice low but steady. Bumpy didn't respond at first. He just watched the brownstone, watching the shadows flicker behind the windows, the faint movement of figures silhouetted against the curtains. They were waiting for the right moment. "Let's go," Bumpy said quietly. His tone was calm, but there was a certainty in it. He wasn't just leading men into a fight, he was setting a trap. They moved swiftly, cutting through the alleys and around corners. They had the element of surprise, and Bumpy planned to make sure that advantage counted. When they reached the back entrance of the brownstone, they were in position. Bumpy gave a nod to Big Jim, who signaled the rest of the crew. The plan was simple. Break in fast, make sure the message was clear, and get out. No bloodshed unless it was absolutely necessary. But Bumpy wasn't naive. He knew that when dealing with men like Schultz, violence was inevitable. As they kicked down the back door and stormed inside, the element of surprise worked in their favor. Schultz's men froze, caught off guard. Bumpy's crew moved quickly, weapons drawn, forcing the men into a corner. But it was Schultz who would need to be dealt with. He was sitting at the table, a cigar dangling from his lips, as if he owned the room. But when he saw Bumpy step through the door, That smug expression on his face vanished. His eyes narrowed, calculating his options. The room was heavy with tension, and everyone knew this was the moment where everything would be decided. "You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine, Bumpy?" Schultz's voice was thick with anger, but there was an edge of fear in it. He was trying to bluff, trying to act tough, but Bumpy wasn't fazed. "You're in my city now, Schultz," Bumpy replied, his voice like a slow-burning fuse. "And I've had enough of you trying to take what's mine." For a brief moment, there was silence, a heavy pause where both men sized each other up. Schultz thought about making a move, but Bumpy could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. He knew Bumpy had already won. The streets had already made their choice. "You'll regret this, Bumpy," Schultz finally spat, his bravado slipping. Bumpy stepped forward, his gun aimed directly at Schultz's chest. "I don't regret anything. You've crossed me, Dutch, and now you're gonna pay." Schultz's hand shot out, reaching for his weapon, but before he could make a move, Bumpy's men had him pinned down. In that moment, Bumpy did something that shocked even his closest men. He grabbed Schultz by the collar and pulled him close. "You don't get to threaten me in my city. You don't get to think you're above the streets. This is Harlem, and in Harlem we deal with our own. You wanted a war? Well, now you've got one." Bumpy's voice was a quiet storm, each word precise and laced with the weight of his authority. He wasn't just speaking to Schultz. He was speaking to anyone who might dare challenge him next. "Tell your people to stay out of my way," Bumpy continued, his grip tightening. "And tell them the price for disrespect is high. Too high for any of you to afford." As Bumpy released Schultz, the man slumped back into his chair, gasping for air. His eyes were wide with fear, but there was nothing he could do now. Bumpy had made it clear. This wasn't just a warning, it was a statement. Harlem wasn't Schultz's playground, not anymore. The aftermath of the confrontation spread like wildfire through Harlem. Word of what had happened in the brownstone was on everyone's lips. Bumpy Johnson had sent a message loud and clear. If you thought you could waltz into his territory, make your deals, and walk away unscathed, you were gravely mistaken. In the days that followed, Schultz's operation in Harlem crumbled. His men scattered, unsure of what had just transpired, but all too aware that their leader had just been humiliated by the man who owned the city. The once formidable Dutch Schultz now looked like a fool, while Bumpy's stock in the streets of Harlem skyrocketed. The power dynamics had shifted once again, but this time it was irreversible. Bumpy didn't need to make a show of it. He let his actions speak for themselves. The message wasn't just about one gangster or one city. It was about an entire underworld, an entire system where power came with a price. Harlem had seen its share of violent confrontations, but none like this. Bumpy had done more than just protect his turf. He had reasserted his dominance in the harshest way possible, and no one would forget it. The streets respected strength, but they also respected control. Bumpy had not only proven that he was untouchable, but he had also solidified his position as the true king of Harlem. As weeks turned into months, the fallout from Bumpy Johnson's decisive confrontation with Dutch Schultz echoed through the streets of Harlem and beyond. The community, always hungry for stories of power, loyalty, and justice, had already spun their version of the tale, turning Bumpy's actions into legend. Word of the bloodbath, of Bumpy's cold resolve, spread not only through the avenues of Harlem, but through every borough, seeping into the very fabric of New York's criminal underworld. Bumpy had made it clear to everyone Harlem was his domain, and anyone who thought they could challenge his reign would suffer the consequences. But it wasn't just the chaos of the fight that cemented his position. It was the aftermath. The way he carried himself, the way he made sure his message was both clear and final, ensured that anyone thinking of stepping up to him would think twice. The respect Bumpy commanded went far beyond fear. It was about understanding the delicate balance of power, about recognizing that every action, every move, had a cost. With Schultz and his men driven out of Harlem, a power vacuum remained. But instead of chaos, Bumpy's rule brought order. His men took control of the areas that had once been dominated by Schultz's crew. The heroin trade, the gambling operations, the illicit businesses, all of it fell back into the hands of Bumpy's loyal followers. Bumpy didn't just retain control, he strengthened it. And the mafia? They had long kept an eye on Harlem, but now Bumpy was more than just a name. They saw him as an asset. His connection to the streets, his ability to command loyalty, was something the mafia could no longer ignore. Bumpy had proven himself not just as a gangster, but as a kingpin who could play the game at the highest level. It wasn't long before the mafia made overtures to Bumpy, business deals, quiet alliances, and mutual understandings. They respected the fact that Bumpy had carved out his empire with his own hands. He didn't rely on outside help or power. He had built his territory from the ground up, earning every inch. Harlem had become a hub, a vital part of the underworld, and Bumpy's ties to the mafia solidified his standing not only as a local legend, but as an international force. Despite his rise to power, Bumpy never lost sight of the community he had fought to protect. Harlem wasn't just his empire, it was his home. He walked its streets, talked to its people, and kept the peace, knowing that loyalty wasn't just given, it was earned. He had seen firsthand what could happen when ambition overtook loyalty, and he refused to let the streets of Harlem fall into chaos again. For those who had been loyal to him, Bumpy's rise was a testament to their strength as well. His men like Big Jim, who had stood by him since the early days, now stood at the top with him. They had been through the battles together, and their loyalty had paid off. Bumpy wasn't just their boss, he was their protector, the man who had shown them that with loyalty came power. The story of Bumpy Johnson's victory over Dutch Schultz would be told for generations, not just as a tale of vengeance, but as a symbol of strength and respect. It wasn't just about the bloodshed, it was about the man who had made it clear that no one was above him. Bumpy wasn't just another gangster, he was a legend, and Harlem was his kingdom. Bumpy Johnson's reign in Harlem was defined by moments like the war with Dutch Schultz. It wasn't the kind of conflict that was won in a single night. It was a battle that had been years in the making, a struggle for power, respect, and survival in the brutal streets of New York. But what set Bumpy apart from the many others who had come before him was not just his strength. It was his understanding of the game. In the end, it wasn't the bloodshed that made him a legend. It wasn't the battles fought in darkened alleys or the threats made behind closed doors. It was his unwavering belief in the code of respect, loyalty, and justice that governed the streets. Bumpy Johnson didn't rule Harlem through fear alone. He ruled through a deep, unshakable understanding of the people and the power structures that made up his empire. His victory over Dutch Schultz marked a turning point in the criminal world, not just in Harlem, but across New York. Bumpy had shown everyone that in his world, there was no room for disrespect, no tolerance for anyone who thought they could come in and take what he had built. The message had been sent, and it wasn't just to Schultz. It was to every man who thought they could challenge him. This wasn't just a story of one man's rise to power. It was the story of how a community, a way of life, and a king's reign could be forged in the fires of ambition, loyalty, and justice. Bumpy Johnson didn't just claim Harlem, he defined it. Harlem had many stories, but none would be as enduring, as powerful, or as legend-making as that of Bumpy Johnson. His legacy wasn't just about the streets he controlled, it was about the honor, the respect, and the iron will that drove him to be remembered as one of the most iconic figures in American history.